Our special guest right now is Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. He is the head of research and development here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and you are also the director of the Autism Research Group. We've been talking with Dr. Tarbox about DTT in the last segment, but we mentioned that there are other ways in which we want to work with our children. So talk to us a little bit about NET.
Sure.
And maybe, tell us when is it a good idea to use one and when is it a good idea to use the other?
Right. So we talked about how earlier forms of earlier forms of ABA for children with autism focused heavily on DTT. And that's great, and that produced really great results, and it worked really, really well. But then there's quite a bit of research now, actually starting in 1968, but even more so in the last 30 years, on more naturalistic or play-based approaches to behavioral intervention. So it's still using the principles of applied behavior analysis, and it's still creating learning opportunities and using prompting and immediate feedback with positive reinforcement. It's all the same basic principles and procedures. The difference is it's embedded into more sort of natural environment learning opportunities. Okay, so for example. Plus there's lots of different procedures, sort of brands, that all fall within what we would consider NET. So for example, you might have heard of pivotal response training, or PRT. Milieu training is one that comes out of education. Natural language paradigm, the MAND model, incidental teaching, modified incidental teaching. All these are different approaches that focus on building building behavioral sort of teaching principles and procedures into more natural environment interactions. So I'm not saying that there's no difference between all those different ones, but the similarities between those many procedures are enough such that it makes sense to talk about all of them as NET, or natural environment training.
Right.
So here's some of the features that pretty much all natural environment training shares. One, the learning opportunity is directed by the student, not the teacher. So in discrete trial training, the whole point is the teacher controls the rate of learning opportunity. So the teacher delivers the instruction, that's the learning opportunity, okay? And the whole point is make lots of them happen as fast as possible, so you get the most learning in the shortest amount of time possible. In natural environment training, it's different. The student actually makes some kind of initiation that starts the learning opportunity, okay? So let me give an example of what I mean. In discrete trial training, if we wanted to teach a child, let's say a color, like black, teaching the color black, okay? You might hold up something that's black and say, what color is it? So that's a clear instruction, right? And the student has the opportunity to respond, and you reinforce correct response.
Okay.
If we were doing that same thing, but in natural environment training, we would set up a situation for where the student would want to initiate to something black on their own, and so they'd initiate the learning opportunity. So we might take their favorite teddy bear that happens to be black and put it up on the shelf out of reach, and so the student looks up at it and goes like this. That's the student initiating the learning opportunity, especially if they look at you, right? So they reach up, they can't get the bear, it's too high up, and then they look at you, boom, that's a learning opportunity. And so there, they have an opportunity to respond, just like discrete trial training. So they could say the word black for the bear, or you could prompt it, so black or buh. The student says black, great, you reinforce, okay?
Great.
But the opportunity to learn is controlled by the student, it's not controlled by the teacher. Now there's some pluses and minuses to that, okay? A major plus is already the student is motivated because they're initiating the opportunity, right? So you're not forcing them to do something they don't want to do, which is really not what we do in DTT anyways, but still, you're sure that the motivation is there. However, there's a major disadvantage of that too, and that is you kind of have to wait around for the kid to want to learn, right? And we already know that that doesn't work. That doesn't produce enough learning opportunities, right? If waiting for children with autism to initiate learning produce enough learning opportunities, I wouldn't have a job, So there's major advantages and disadvantages. Here's another feature, though, of NET is, pardon me, instruction occurs as much as possible in the natural environment rather than a more contrived environment. So with discrete trial training, it's very clear that some kind of instruction and tutoring is going on. In fact, the teacher or the tutor will say, okay, let's get to work, right? Just like any instructor or tutor would. With natural environment training, if it's done right, the student doesn't even know that they're being trained, okay? So they just hang out in their living room and there's something they want and they reach up for it, okay? All right, so it takes place in the natural environment as opposed to a more clearly instructional environment or contrived environment. And there's pluses and minuses to that as well. If you have a natural environment that's conveniently set up so that you can work on all the skills you need to work on, great. Natural environment's better for generalization. But the fact of the matter is, you don't always have that, right? So, let's say we wanted to work on, objects that have various features, that concept. Well, do we have enough of those objects that just happen to be hanging around in our house, a large enough variety, and et cetera. So it's just common sense that instruction requires some level of contrivance, to make sure that you have enough materials and everything available.
Absolutely.
Here's a third difference between NET and DTT, and this also has its own pluses and minuses, and that is the reinforcer for correct responding is supposed to be the natural consequence of that behavior as much as possible. So again, let's go back to the colors example. If I hold up a black object in DTT and I say, what color is it? And you say black, and I say, all right, great job, and I give you whatever reinforcer was planned for this discrete trial training session, and it's not related to this black object in any way. I don't give you the black thing, okay? Whereas in the teddy bear example, if the kid's reaching for his favorite teddy bear, you prompt him to say black, he says black, you give him the teddy bear. That's what he wanted. So it's the natural consequence. Same thing with making a sandwich. If you're doing NET training on, let's say object labels in the context of making a sandwich, and the kid, points to a piece of bread because he needs the bread for the sandwich, and you prompt him to say bread, and he says bread, you give him the bread. That's the natural consequence of the kid saying bread, right?
Absolutely.
So the reinforcement in NET is much more natural. It's less contrived.
Okay. My question, because I always have a question.
Great.
So let's go back to the example of black. So the DTT way you're teaching and you're holding a black and saying whatever. Now in NET, if I say, what do you want to play today? And the child says, I want to play trains, and we go and play trains, and I know I want to work on...
That's definitely a discrete trial.
If I say, what do you want to play, that's still DTT.
That's definitely a discrete trial because it's initiated by the teacher, not the student. The student didn't ask themselves what they want to play. You initiated it, okay? And it's not necessarily in the context of natural environment. I mean, let's say you were already playing with the kid, and you're done with one activity, and you said, all right, what should we play next?
Right.
In the context of play, then that would be very much gray area. That's probably sort of half and half,
Interesting.
And the fact of the matter is, real life teaching and learning usually isn't 100% NET or 100% DTT. Real life is usually somewhere in between, or
but we don't have a
borrowing
name
aspects
for that.
from both.
We have real life teaching.
Right. Well, the thing is, though, the important thing to note is the whole choice between NET and DTT really isn't a choice. It's a false dichotomy. There's no good quality ABA programs that only do one or only do the other. Because neither one of them is good enough on their own. DTT provides lots of learning opportunities, a much higher rate of learning opportunities than NET, but NET is really great for generalization. It helps the kid generalize the skills to the natural environment because you're already in the natural environment, so they learn them in the natural environment.
So I think the takeaway is that if we want to be successful, and I define success as creating as much progress as possible for an individual child, then we have to be using DTT and NET.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think there's any credible top quality behavior analytic program anymore that would say you can have maximum success for a young child with autism in an intensive ABA program and only do one or the other. That's ridiculous. And people who say that anymore either don't understand how those two procedures fit within the overall umbrella of ABA, or they've just been kind of maybe brainwashed by whatever camp they belong to. It's just not reasonable anymore to say that you just do one or the other. It's silly.
But I think parents are going to be relieved to hear that, because I think we look at it objectively that way automatically.
Yeah, well, and that's just sort of a simplistic and childish way of looking at things, like politics. Like, it's either this or that, there's no compromise. I mean, that's just not how learning works. You really want to use a combination of both.
ABA, having DTT and NET, and that's what's going to create real progress.
That's right.
Wonderful.